which of course does kind of fit with what Dr. Bergman has been saying. Is let's use our imagination to pull out whatever we want. As for the issue of vestigial organs, I'm glad we're talking about one specific issue. The problem there is that Dr. Bergman has a very peculiar definition of what a vestigial organ is. No evolutionary biologist defines a vestigial organ as an organ that has no function at all. That's simply not it. A vestigial organ is a reduced remnant of an organ that had a more substantial prior function. We can still have function. That doesn't rule it out at all. So, for instance, the appendix in other species, it's much more prominent, much larger, and what it is the storage and fermentation organ. And it's been reduced to this little tiny stub in us human beings. Now, this little stub is sitting there. Our explanation for it is that it's a contingent feature of the organism, that it's there because ancestors had genes that formed this particular structure. But the fact that it is now sitting there means that it's still in danger of infection, so it contains immune system tissue. It contains these things called Peyer's patches, which are little concentrated nodules of immune system tissue to produce antibodies and things like that to fight off infection. That's all it is. That does not mean that the appendix is there as an immune system organ. It is secondarily being used as an immune system organ. Let's talk about irreducible complexity now. That was the strangest definition of irreducible complexity I have ever heard. Michael Behe, if you read his book, Darwin's Black Box, is very specific in what irreducible complexity means. He's talking about biochemical pathways, and he's saying that if you've got a long biochemical pathway, which if you remove any one piece of it, it loses all of its function, it cannot make its terminal product, then that can't have evolved. That's very specific, okay? To extend it and say that a carbon atom is irreducibly complex, it doesn't make any sense at all. That's saying that the entire universe is irreducibly complex. There's no feature in this universe that is not irreducibly complex, which is not Behe's intent at all, and makes this particular question useless. We need specific things we can test it against to rule out whether something is irreducibly complex or not. Irreducible complexity as a legitimate concept in biochemistry and biology has been refuted many times. Remember, what it says is you've got a pathway with a number of steps, and if you lose one, you can't get to the final one. And that's true. We can find many biochemical pathways that have exactly that property. Some of them that Michael Behe has even mentioned. That if you remove a step in the blood clotting pathway, for instance, the whole pathway can't function. You end up with something like hemophilia, person bleeds to death. And it's entirely correct. However, it says nothing about how that pathway arose in the first place. Because what we can do is we can go out into nature and collect other species and ask, okay, what steps of the pathway do they have? And what we discovered is there are many representatives of organisms in our lineage who are missing pieces of that pathway. And blood clots just fine. What's going on in the origin of irreducibly complex pathways is that you've got a simpler pathway to begin with, you add an extra step, and various other processes then make that an indispensable part of the whole process. So you can't remove it after the fact. But it says nothing about the prior state of the organism. So it's an incredibly misleading thing to use. First of all, it doesn't say what the proponents of irreducible complexity say. That is, it does not disprove evolution in any way, and that's what we mean by it being refuted. And in particular, it doesn't fit this definition that Dr. Bergman has thrown out at you. I don't even know where to begin with that. Carbon atoms are not irreducibly complex. Irreducible complexity is used to argue that they could not have arisen by natural processes, that there's no pathway to arrive at that particular state. But if you talk to a physicist, they'll tell you, yeah, there's ways to make carbon atoms. It's going on in the sun right now. and is not little angels busily knitting them together. What it is nuclear processes will build heavier and heavier molecules as time goes by, as the reactions proceed. One other thing I've got to address is, again, this whole business of the periodic table. I've read your book, but I don't remember the details of that case. I'll have to look it up later. It is in your book, right?
No, it's in the next book.
Okay.
There's 5 volumes in the set.
Oh. So we have an unsourced case here. All right. It's just peculiar because I have several colleagues in the chemistry department at my university, and they teach the periodic table. I mean, I teach in the same auditorium. I walk in there, and there's a periodic table up there on the ceiling. It's very familiar. I can't quite imagine somebody saying you're fired because you teach the periodic table. I'll have to read your next book and see if you make a somewhat more believable case.
Please do.
Okay.
I still have a couple of minutes. 2 minutes, 20 seconds.
Okay. Let me say a few words preemptively about some of the things that I'm sure we'll hear about next is ideas about instructors who've been fired and lost their job, who've been, in the evocative words of his title, slaughtered for believing in things that other people don't believe in. This doesn't seem to be the case. There's a number of prominent cases where teachers have lost jobs, and it's partly because of what I told you earlier, that teaching is a responsibility. That teachers are told what pieces of the curriculum they are responsible to teach. And for instance, in high school biology, biology teachers are told, you're supposed to teach the evolution section. We need that. And similarly, the people in the biology section are told that, well, the earth science people are going to teach geology. And we like that because that helps us biologists because it's part of the story. There have been cases where teachers have been reassigned, and one of the more prominent ones was one that occurred right here in the state of Minnesota. I'll mention Rodney LeVake in 2000, who wanted to teach creationism, intelligent design in the classroom. And again, he did it the way I told you they would do it. And that is, instead of proposing a positive case for intelligent design, he was putting out these little nitpicking arguments against evolution. Things like the appendix is not a vestigial organ, etc. That's not making a case for intelligent design. He had a specific curriculum that required teaching, and he openly admitted that he had not taught the subject and that he had instead presented this laundry list of fallacious criticisms of evolution. And most importantly, he was not fired. He was reassigned to teach general science where he wouldn't have to have a conflict with his religious beliefs. So what the court decision there basically affirmed is that schools have the right to set their curriculum. And that's the problem under debate here. Schools do not have intelligent design in the curriculum. Teachers shouldn't teach it. Okay, 8 seconds. I'll stop there.
Okay. Well done. All right. Well, so far we've really stayed right on schedule here. We were supposed to begin specific questions from each speaker to the other at 8:40, and by my watch it is 8:41. So I must be doing my job. All right. Dr. Bergman, do you have a question for Dr. Myers?
Yeah, I have a question. I've spoken at many audiences and always ask the audience if they know of anybody who is an out-of-the-closet ID supporter or creationist who got tenure. I haven't found anybody except 2 people. These were cases that happened a few years ago. Do you know any out-of-the-closet ID supporter or creationist who was openly out of the closet and who got tenure at a university?
No. And the problem there is?
So you're saying they should be terminated?
I'm saying in order to get tenure, what you have to have is basic competence in your discipline. You have to have a publication record in your discipline. You have to be able to interact and work with your colleagues in your discipline. And somebody who rejects the basic principles of biology is not somebody we want teaching biology. So yeah, I think it's entirely appropriate that somebody who promotes a theory that is not a theory, that has no evidence, should not be given tenure in a university department.
Okay.
Okay. Dr. Myers, you have a question for Dr. Bergman?
Well, I would like some explanation. How can you say that the carbon atom is irreducible complex? What is your personal definition of irreducible complexity, and how does it differ from Mike Behe's?
Okay, I correspond with Mike Behe on this, and so we agree. Irreducible complexity is where structures, if you remove beyond a certain point, the structure no longer works. It doesn't mean you can't remove a part. It means that there's a certain level where it is irreducibly complex and the structure no longer functions. And a good example, because it's nice and clear, is the periodic table. It's a good example of irreducible complexity. And I realize we have nucleosynthesis. That's not the concern. The concern is, to have a carbon atom, do you have to have a certain number of protons, electrons, and neutrons? Not an ion, but a carbon-12 atom. What do you have to have that? And that is a very clear example of irreducible complexity. And the only way one would not be irreducibly complex is if you can go down to the point where you have a fundamental particle, like a quark or a lepton, and they would be irreducibly complex. But everything above that would be irreducibly complex, including life, watches, radios, etc.
But this is defeating the entire intent of the irreducible complexity argument. Because the irreducible complexity argument is being used to argue that structures couldn't have evolved in particular ways. But what we discover is that things like carbon atoms could have arisen and did arise by natural mechanisms. So that's not an argument for intelligent design anymore.
Well, we have two steps. One step is something irreducibly complex. The next step is, could it come about by natural means? And of course, relative to the elements, of course, it can come about by natural means. But that doesn't mean that it's not irreducibly complex. That simply, now we're talking about how things came into existence, which is another question.
Okay, it doesn't appear that we're going to reach agreement.
No, actually, I'll agree entirely with him. It just means that irreducible complexity is no longer a useful argument for evolution.
Right.
That's fine with me.
Okay. Yeah. My understanding. Okay. I'm not going to.
Can I answer that?
Yeah. Sure. Quickly.
I think it's an excellent argument for intelligent design. A very good argument, but you have to go a step at a time, and I can't do it in 30 seconds.
Okay. And let me invite at this point members of the audience who have questions to start lining up here. You're going to have to come to the mic and just get out of your chair and come on down. And again, I'm going to limit you to about less than a minute, so there's not going to be any sort of nonsense because I won't stand for it. And then we can have. So let's see, who had the last? Dr. Well, should we just go to audience questions? Is that okay? Are you ready for audience questions? Okay. All right. By consent of the participants here, we're going to give about 20-25 minutes to questions or until people get tired or start crying. All right. And if you want to address it to a particular person, that'll be fine, and then we'll let the other person comment briefly, okay? And again, try to limit your questions to...
Michael Behe was very specific on irreducible complexity being removing a part and stopping the biological function. You've now reduced it to the subatomic level. How is that not the logical fallacy of moving the goal? What's your endpoint?
My endpoint is I agree with Michael Behe. There are many structures where if you go to a certain point, if you remove beyond a certain point, the structure no longer works. And one comes across that all the time in cell biology, molecular biology, and so on. So I don't see any contradiction.
Okay.
I think that's wonderful because it moves Michael Behe one step further into cloud cuckoo land.
I'd like to ask a question of Dr. Myers. He indicated that the appendix secondarily serves as an immune system. What in the world is the first reason it exists? I haven't heard you explain that, nor anybody else.
Oh,
And how do you know that? Thank you.
Because we can put together a phylogeny. We can systematically analyze the relationships of the various organisms that are related to creatures like us, and we can ask, what did they use it for? And what we find is that earlier mammals used it as a digestive organ, as part of a storage sac in digesting hard to digest materials like plant matter.
This is for Dr. Bergman. My understanding is that you would like evidence for ID to be taught in schools. Could you please provide some falsifiable evidence? Also, why did you feel the need to open with a personal attack against Dr. Myers? Thank you.
Oh, I didn't know that was personal. I really thought he did a good job. I was honestly did. I didn't know that was a personal attack. So, and if it was taken that way, I apologize because I really thought he did a very good job. Watch the movie and let me know what you think, because I thought he did a good job. But anyways, what was the question again?
Positive evidence.
Oh, positive evidence.
Yeah.
It's easy, positive evidence. All you have to do is prove the other theory, which is Darwinism. If you come up with a source for genetic variation, given the fact that mutations are problematic, come up with a source for genetic variation. Whatever you prove in favor of the opposite, the opposing theory, which is evolution, you have worked against or built a case against intelligent design.
Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, that's a logical fallacy. That's saying it's black and white world, that either this thing is true or this other thing is true, and by disproving the one, you've proven the other. That's not the case here. If you look in evolutionary biology, we talk about many other mechanisms besides natural selection and drift, that when you talk to developmental biologists like me, we'll go on and on about evo-devo and genetic constraints and modularity and all these other processes that go on. So if, for instance, you disprove natural selection in one instance, which we often try to do, that does not rule out things like drift, doesn't rule out developmental constraints, and it certainly doesn't demonstrate intelligent design in the creation of the structure.
Okay. Next question.
As I understood, that one of the claims of
Can you speak into the mic?
Yes, the universe comes to be have evolved. To be evolved means cannot be like from more inferior things combined or construct. Yeah, only creator method for this. Yeah, without creator cannot be evolved. Did you mean that cannot be?
Lost is your question.
Cannot exist without creator. Yeah.
So you can't get complexity without the intervention of a creator. That's intelligent design.
Well, the idea of intelligent design is you're looking for evidence of intelligent input. And I'll give you a good example from, let's quote from Richard Dawkins. I'm sure you all respect what he has to say. So he says, the difference between life, this is on page 405 of his latest book, which I'm just finished. It says the difference between life and non-life is a matter not of substance, but of information. Living things contain prodigious quantities of information. And basically, intelligent design is where we are looking for evidence of information. And as time goes on, this conclusion of Richard Dawkins is becoming more and more true, because we realize that the genes are not the boss. They have a boss above the genes. For example, epigenetics.
Okay. I respect your authority. But isn't it logical, like step-by-step consequence from this your claim that the universe too complex to have evolved? Yeah? But God, by idea claims also that God has created this too complex to be evolved.
Well, I think that's a step beyond what ID would do.
Yeah, or creator. Yeah.
So can you get to the point, right? Wrap up the argument.
It means as God is more complex than even universe, it's too complex to be evolved. No, it means God is also.
You're saying for God to create something complex, God must be more complex than that which is created.
Right.
Yeah, and also necessary to be created.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Do you want to speak to that? Well, if the complexity of the universe requires a complex creator, who created the complex creator?
Okay, that's the old idea where you either end up with going back to what they call infinite regression, and of course both creation and evolution have the same problem. Creationist, the problem is, where did God come from? Evolutionist, the problem is, where did the universe come from? Where did the material which produced the Big Bang come from? So we have the same problem in both cases.
Okay. PZ, do you want to speak to the ontological argument?
Well, actually, I have to respond to one comment because Richard Dawkins would be mad at me if I let it slide by. As you quoted his book in defense of intelligent design. That's very misleading again. We do not deny that there's an increase in information in evolution and also in development. What we say, though, is that these increases are a result of natural processes, and that's the source of the center of the debate, is whether natural processes can generate new information or whether you require an intelligent designer. And we can say emphatically that natural processes are very good at generating new information.
Next question, please.
Can I ask a question both of Dr. Bergman and Dr. Myers?
Sure.
Okay, for Dr. Bergman.
Two separate questions.
Yeah, just a quick
I have to think about that. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe you can answer them shortly.
All right.
Dr. Bergman, you said that religion has no place in science. Is one type of science theology, that is the study of God?
Okay, good point. Let me answer that I don't think people should be fired for occasionally mentioning their own personal beliefs. I don't think it's a good idea, but on the other hand, I really think academic freedom is critically important, and a lot of my colleagues say things that I strongly disagree with, but on the other hand, I defend their right to say it. If I want to have academic freedom, I have to defend their academic freedom. And I can give you many examples of where people, like the appendix is, in one class, is useless, has no function. And this is what a student reported to me, and the student said, that's a problem I have with that because our book and the class, A&P, Anatomy and Physiology, clearly points out several functions the appendix has. And yet my biology teacher is just telling us that the appendix has no function. I said, well, look it up on the internet, I'll give you some references. And indeed has not one function, but probably 6 or 7 different functions besides the immune function.
Dr. Myers, I got a two-parter here for you.
First 3 questions.
Are the manifestations of intelligent design actually measurable and describable a theory? Or instead, are they obvious facts of a mutually agreed upon phenomena? That's the first question, if you want.
I think that's the last question.
Well, I would say the whole problem here is that they can't define what a manifestation of intelligent design is. So that's where they lose. If you can't tell me that something, if you can't give me a specific positive explanation for why there's an appendix, for instance, as a product of intelligent design, you've lost the argument. You've got nothing to argue.
Okay, Dr. Bergman, I had a point of clarification. You gave an example where you said that a school teaching creationism, their students were said to be at least 2 grades ahead. What exactly were they 2 grades ahead on? If they were going on to university, would they be juniors in their programs rather than freshmen? Were they that far ahead in the subject matter of biology, or were they simply in general on math?
The standardized tests that were given to these students, and I'm talking specifically about homeschooler students. Now that, of course, is a problem because homeschooling, they generally get more attention than students in schools, but I'm also talking about Christian schools, and there are quite a few, and they do collect data on this. Many states require them to collect data where their students are compared to public schools so they can maintain their permission to be able to operate as Christian schools. I'm also talking about students who graduate from schools that teach creationism openly, like Bob Jones University, Liberty University, and other schools. And they followed up their students, for example, going to medical school, and they have found they've done quite well.
So you're saying that they managed to teach both creationism and evolution and have their students go on to be alright in the evolutionary?
Yes. Several studies have found by teaching both creation and evolution, students have a better knowledge of both and do better on exams on both.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Okay, and let me ask both presenters, if you can cite specific studies, or if you can point people to particular resources, whether those be internet resources or published papers. I think that would help to clarify things a bit here. Next question.
Hi. Well, I want to say that I am a Christian, but I'm not an evangelical or fundamentalist, and Dr. Myers is right on. I want to make a question. What? Okay, I want to make a statement. Okay, it is not necessary for a scientist, an evolutionary scientist, to be an atheist. but it is necessary for every evolutionary scientist not to resort to Deus ex machina in making a scientific explanation. Now, do you understand what I'm saying? Okay, now, because I know there are Christians who are scientists.
TikTok.
Okay. Okay. This is all stalking horse. The exile, Darwin to Hitler is all an exile, and you can chime in. The problem is that atheists are not immoral, but they are amoral. And there really isn't an atheist version of evil.
Okay, I think we're going to, unless you have a question.
Well, my question is that true?
Thank you.
That's true. Many people are, quote, evolutionists, and they also are Christians. In my case, I found there to be contrast between the two worldviews, and in my case, I became a Christian because of my science research. I didn't read Creation magazine. I read the scientific literature, and my conclusions were a result of reading the scientific literature. Some people, Christians talk about spiritual experiences, and they go on retreats and so on. A spiritual experience for me is really reading science and nature, which I've subscribed to for 30 years. It's a spiritual high to understand how indeed the world works, and I find this incredibly reinforcing relative to my belief that indeed we were a result of an intelligent designer.
Okay, have you ever read Kierkegaard?
Okay, no, we're not getting into Kierkegaard. Sorry, man, that's off limits. We're not going to do that. Thank you. Next question.
Dr. Berger, how does intelligent design explain change over time, or do ideas not believe in change over time?
They explain change over time the same way Darwinists do. My guess is a lot of the courses I teach, I have the exact same content that P.Z. Myers covers. There's no problem with change over time. That's not the concern at all. The concern is ultimately